I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing and advertising. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chin-wag with. It's like Pokemon Go with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today, I've caught Wiemer Snijders. A Dutchman with a famous banana, more on that later, Wiemer is one of the most prominent figures at the forefront of marketing sciences. Currently a partner at the Commercial Works, he recently curated Eat Your Greens, fact-based thinking to improve your brand's health, which features contributions from 35 of the world's top marketers, including the likes of Byron Sharp, Mark Ritson and Bob Hoffman. Wiemer says the marketing world is awash with myths, misconceptions, dubious metrics and tactics that bear little relation to our actual buying behaviour. Welcome to the show, Wiemer.
Thank you, Giles. Happy to be here.
Let's limber up with our quick-fire questions. Mac or PC?
Currently Mac, but actually thinking about buying a PC.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh, Star Wars, definitely.
Book or Facebook?
Book.
Apples or bananas?
Bananas.
Ritson or Sharp?
Oh, dear. Sharp.
Efficiency or effectiveness?
Both, but effectiveness first.
Be different or be distinct?
Distinct.
Distinct, good stuff. Right, That was the last one. I should have qualified that before asking. So, first question that we like to ask is, I personally, and I know the listeners and colleagues of mine find it really reassuring and interesting to understand how talented people join the industry. So typically people have a perception that we step out of a shiny university into a shiny marketing gig somewhere. So can you tell us what your circumstances were? So how did you end up in marketing?
I felt like I came out of several nice and shiny places, and as I not only went to uni but also went to the Academy of Arts, and I felt like I was properly trained, and I wasn't only trained academically but also creatively, so to speak. And so I felt I was really ready for, so let's say, the marketing profession and the marketing industry. And I felt like, well, who wouldn't want to hire me? But that was around, just about 2001, 2002. And I don't know how old you are exactly, but that was sort of, what we considered then to be sort of a fairly serious financial crisis that we ended up in, so like the internet bubble. And obviously, the doors weren't wide open, and especially not at ad agencies, obviously being so sensitive to economic changes, and in this case, obviously negative change. So there I was, thinking I was sort of the perfect candidate for any ad agency. It was essentially more me walking in the door, and I'd be set. But I wasn't, obviously. Because nobody wanted to hire an inexperienced person, because we needed to make money now. We didn't have any time to educate people, because you might come out of some sort of shiny place, but you obviously also always will sort of need to gain a bit of experience, and that's so that was obviously my problem, and together with me a lot of other people that graduated around that time, I suppose, and were looking for a job in marketing or advertising. So. I ran into a friend who had been running a successful studio for a while, and they were doing music, soundscapes, jingles, all sorts of things for the ad industry, also the film industry. So they were essentially a music studio, and they were doing really well. They were doing doing stuff for BMW, MTV, and all those sorts of things. And but essentially they were just musicians essentially. But they were really hitting it off, and they said, well, we can actually use someone who can help us, with all the other stuff essentially. So marketing, sales, account management, and because we don't really like that stuff, but we know it's important, and we need to do a proper job if we don't want to run ourselves into the ground. And I thought, well, so if I'm having a hard time, getting a job at an ad agency, why don't I just work for these guys, do a bit of work, but because it'll get me inside ad agencies, I'll get to know people within ad agencies because there was a lot of work that we did for ad agencies, and you know what, maybe that will get me into advertising. So I did that for a while, and funny enough, I didn't end up in advertising because I was actually a bit appalled by it. Yeah, I had these ideas. It was a really exciting industry to work in, and just given my background, I never really wanted to be in a creative role or anything like that. I was really interested in learning more about the whole creative process and how it came about, and what people learn who actually did want to end up in roles like that. But at least from my end, it was sort of the reason why I went to the Academy of Arts was that I was just learning a lot of stuff about marketing and communications and persuasion, and how people buy things, consumer psychology, and also all those sorts of things. But I also realized, well, in the end, there's also just people that need to make the ads, that will need to have that effect that I'm sort of learning about in uni. But I'm not learning any of that in uni. So for me, that was a decision to go to the Academy of Arts, not necessarily with the ambition to become a creative director or anything like that, but just seeing and speaking to so many people at ad agencies seemed like, for me, as someone who was more interested in the thinking and the problem solving, it might actually not be as thrilling and exciting as I thought it was. So then, sort of my real proper job in marketing was in consulting, where I ended up after working for the studio. It was actually a bit weird because I was having a really good time. It was a lot of fun working there, and we did a lot of fun stuff. I've always played musical instruments, so it was also, in a way, sort of very close to what I enjoyed doing besides work and all that. But on the other end, I felt like I didn't go to uni for nothing, essentially. So I managed to get a job at one of the largest consulting firms in the Netherlands, which specialized in not necessarily marketing strategy, probably more brand strategy. So brand positioning, brand portfolio, pitch consulting. Is that what you call it? So agency selection, agency remuneration, selection, auditing, things like that. So in a way, it was sort of interesting that I ended up going back to these ad agencies that I'd known, and I'd known quite a few people already, but now in a very, very different position where as a consultant, I was sort of reviewing them, auditing them, and helping my clients select the best one for them. So that was sort of interesting, and I did that for a couple of years, and sort of really started doing the things I was probably more trained in to a certain degree.
And did you feel more suited to that type of role?
I guess what's probably already clear from what I just mentioned, that I have a sort of a very analytical side. I like to solve problems, like to think analytically. On the other end, there's a bit of more of a creative side in me, and I guess many people will have that to a certain degree. But I sort of always feel that those are two opposing forces that sometimes pull me more in one direction than in another. So after working at the consulting firm, that felt really good. I enjoyed that very much. I learned a lot, but I was at one point approached by a headhunter who asked whether I would be interested in working for a small subsidiary of a creatively led agency from Boston. It was called Modernista. It's not, the agency is not around anymore. It was sort of, in terms of its profile, was similar to, let's say, One Kennedy, 180 Amsterdam, or just 180, and 72 and Sunny, agencies like that. So relatively small, independent, creatively led agencies, and so that sounded really interesting, because going back to the moment that I sort of came out of uni, I was, as I said, I was sort of appalled is maybe a bit of a big word, but it's sort of, the ad industry didn't really seem that interesting anymore, except for places like Wyden Kennedy, where I must say that was really interesting. That when I tried to get into, at least get sort of get to talk to people. So when I came out of uni, talk to people, trying to get a job and interviews and things like that. The only agency person that really took time to I think I talked for 2 hours with that guy. I was head of strategy at the time, Jackson. His last name was Jackson. I think his first name is Jeremy, if I can't remember it correctly. But he was head of strategy there, head of planning at Wyden, and he just really took the time to get to know me and talk to me. And he didn't have a job for me at the time. He didn't even have an internship, but he nonetheless took the time to get to know me. And I think his idea was, well, you never know. You never know where you end up, and whether you run into each other. And when there is an opportunity, it's just good to know who you are and what kind of person you are. So that interestingly enough, that still sticks with me after, what is it, 20 or 19 years, 20 years now. But so the opportunity to work for that type of agent, for that type of agency, there were people from Wyden that worked at Modern Eastern as well, and so that sort of pulled me in that direction. So for a brief while, I worked for the office that they opened in Amsterdam with a small group of people on a few international accounts, or a couple of accounts, brands that wanted to launch their brand globally, and our client demanded from Modernista that they'd be able to service them better, and not only from Boston. So it was exciting times, building a little thingy and traveling quite a bit, doing a lot of stuff. But in the end, I did realize that was not the right place for someone like me, because in the end, again, sort of that opposing force kept pulling me in, saying, well, how about thinking a little bit more about marketing and brands? It's just because in many cases, I think that got put on the back burner quite often. And then I just ran into an old colleague from my consulting days, and I've been self-employed ever since.
Have you seen much change in the industry? And is there anything that stands out as a significant change that you've observed?
Well, when I was in the Academy of Arts, we had something that was called new media, and that was the internet and digital photography. So yeah. Yeah, I think we're all old enough to sort of remember that, but it's going to be really weird that in 10 years' time, a lot of people will not have experienced the rise of the internet. So there's a lot of things have changed in the industry. I think if you just think about them, because we seem obsessed with new things every time, but in the end, it's always sort of a new shiny thing that we really haven't really thought about very well. And we're mainly obsessed by it because it's just a new thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of a recurring theme. But in the past 20 years, obviously there have been new things that we've been obsessed with, but that goes back a little bit longer. I think is what was interesting. Just the whole idea of branding itself sort of started to maybe just take off. Maybe from the 90s onwards. Well, maybe halfway to 90s onwards. So the whole idea of branding and brand portfolio management, I think there's a lot of hype around it, and I think that's different from where we are now, I suppose. When I started out in the consulting work, a lot of clients, at least in the Netherlands, were thinking about, we do have something that we could call, that we have a brand, and we need to think about its position, and do we need more or less brand in our portfolio, and how do we need to structure them? I think those types of discussions have changed, I think, a little bit over the past 15, 20 years. I guess the whole idea and the concept of brand in many industries is sort of now sunken in a bit more. But also, I think it's been waning in the sense that we're not spending gazillions of money on things that are a bit sort of pointless, I guess.
One thing that a friend and colleague of yours, Frederick Halberg, mentioned on his episode, and it was a really good point, and it was one that actually I hadn't really concluded myself, because I'm overly critical of being distracted, or marketers being distracted by the newest shiny new tech or whatever it might be. But Frederick accurately said, but it's also fun to talk about the new stuff, which clearly it is. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us about research and the importance of research, and perhaps how that perception of how important research has changed recently, if of course you believe it has?
Yeah, well, this is a bit hard because I think my own thinking about brands and branding and the importance of things like positioning and brand portfolio have very much changed within that sort of, let's say, 18-year or 20-year time frame, simply because I ran into something about 10 years ago, and that has to do a lot with research, which is obviously Byron Sharp's book, How Brands Grow, which is obviously sort of an excellent summary of decades of work of many, many people. But it did make me wonder how important some of the things that I was sort of doing at that point and before that, with respect to sort of helping my clients position their brand, finding the white space, the importance of differentiating the brand compared, sort of saying something different or just differentiating it in all sorts of ways. I guess How Brands Grow did, and I'm sorry if this is this is obviously probably rather boring, because I guess everybody by now sort of had sort of a similar sort of epiphany maybe, or just after reading it, is that you just read that stuff and it's research based, and you think, oh my god, you know, I've just been yapping out of my neck. It's just I've been just using all of these models, and they all seem to make sense. And if all of my competitors are on the left side, I'm definitely trying to get my client on the right side in whatever sort of onion or 4x or 2x2 you can think of. Sort of because that's not where your competitors are, and that's where the opportunity lies. And you're like, oh fuck! If you read all the research, in many cases it's just really the other way around essentially. And so the importance of research, and just I think what I've found almost embarrassing is that after you've read that book, it wasn't necessarily someone who sort of sat and wrote up something and sort of backed it up with proper research in the past 5 years. No, it was just simply a summary of 50 years of work. So it's really sort of embarrassing in the sense that you're thinking, oh my god, I could have known all of this already. Applying an evidence-based perspective on what we do and what we say, and how you go about that in terms of you proving things, that really changed my own view on the industry and marketing. And then I think just together with me, a lot of other people, and progressively, I think more and more companies are slowly and gradually picking up for various reasons. But on the other end, there's still a lot of stuff that's going wrong because we're just not researching things properly. I think one of the problems that's being addressed in Eat Your Greens as well is by several people is not necessarily that more data means better data or better insights. You can actually get in some cases you can actually get better evidence from less data. No, it's not the amount of data; it's whether you found evidence for something, and that doesn't necessarily require huge data sets. For example, it's knowing how to look for proof, and when to say, well, this is really robust, or this is really, this is a finding. We can now safely say that X is something. It's just, I think many people have said this before, but it's even medicine didn't start using statistics, I think, as of the 1930s, somewhere around that time. So medicine's been around forever, and people have been researching and testing things, obviously, for quite a long time. But I think the use of the scientific method and statistics experiments has greatly advanced medicine, and I think we're just getting there with marketing. It's not that it's really, there's a few people that have done it for ages, well, for decades essentially, but it sort of takes a while for people to pick it up and be trained in it, and that's, I think, the biggest problem in marketing currently, that people haven't been trained properly. So we first need to do that before we can see the results.
I referred to you, as JP Hansen did on a previous episode, as the Dutchman with a famous banana, so that nobody jumps to any of the wrong conclusions. Can you clarify?
Yeah, you start reading about buyer behavior and the way we buy, and effectively how how brands grow, there is just this very fundamental pattern in our buying, which I describe in the first chapter as well, and it's been described in How Brands Grow 1, I think, the second book as well. It's the negative binomial distribution. That just simply tells you what every brand's or what a brand's customer base looks like, and it varies a little bit, for given categories, but essentially the shape of that distribution is always the same. It's very skewed to the left, depending on how you write on the x-axis, obviously. But if the numbers go from low to high, they will be skewed to the left, meaning that a lot of your customers will do very little, and a few will do a lot, because you can put purchases on the x-axis, or weight of purchase, or all sorts of things that have to do with the buying and the level of buying, or visits. And you will find that most people just do very little with your brand, spend very little on you, visit you very infrequently, and there's a few who do that a lot. And you always get that distribution. But it's called the negative binomial distribution, or the NBD, and Ehrenberg wrote about it in the 1950s. But apparently it hasn't stuck very well. So maybe it had its own little branding problem. So my idea, because when I looked at that, it's shaped like a banana, to be honest. If you think about it, and I use this in presentations, it's my humble attempt, at least, to make that great finding, that very fundamental finding in marketing, just a little bit more memorable. So it's the most frequently purchased item in supermarkets. So even marketers will probably buy them once in a while. So hopefully it will remind them of a very important thing in marketing. Which, just to be honest, if you sort of clock that idea and how fundamental it is, and how pervasive, is that the right word for it? It is. How it works through in all sorts of other things that we are concerned with, pricing, new product development, advertising, media. If you think about all those things and you think back about, the banana, you're all set. I can go home. But it's not easy, because there's a lot of people that try to convince marketers to do the exact opposite. And even very recent examples where people are clearly advising people to do something that goes against that finding in the banana, that every brand just has a lot of customers that do a little and a few do a lot. And even when they grow, that distribution remains the same. If you just, I think I reference a paper from Accenture, and not necessarily to bash them in any sort of way, shape, or form, but it's just. They put out a paper at the end of 2018 where they advise retailers on who they should focus, and it's really they're really trying to sort of change the shape of that distribution based on what they're saying people should focus on. Obviously, the high worth customers. That will happen. It makes life very simple if you understand it and you know how to apply it and you know how to look for it. It's really, marketing becomes a lot simpler. It's not a sort of a silver bullet thing where you'll have instant success overnight, or guarantee. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it really does help you navigate between what is important and not important.
I guess everyone has a hunger for certainty, don't they? So there's lots of things and lots of advice being sold, which, as you say, is the opposite of reality. But equally, you can't ever be certain. So it's a probability game, isn't it?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, equally, the perhaps lack of marketers, lacking marketing training. Your LinkedIn bio starts with the simple, I help you sell more. This is, I agree, exactly what we do. But do you think as an industry, marketers are embarrassed to admit this, or perhaps they have a delusion of grandeur that they can change the world with their brand purpose or self-given titles of marketing wizards or gurus or whatever they want to call themselves?
There's probably just a bit of both. I think as you just actually mentioned yourself, it's to a certain extent just simply to do with the lack of training, being trained in what marketing is supposed to do. It's I went to uni and I studied marketing communications. I can't remember whether, simply because I can't remember it anymore, probably tells you something, is that we really talked about, so how's this going to influence sales? So how has this delivered, X amount of uplift in sales? There was very little talk about how businesses operate, how markets were structured, what conduct, how performance was measured. Very basic things about how do markets work, how a business is set up, how do they operate, what does the P&L look like, how can you influence it, and how can marketing actually contribute to some of those things. Marketing is just getting the money in. It's marketers' job to sell things. That's their job, and but it's just very detached, I think, from just commercial reality. I wonder whether marketers aren't necessarily to blame for the fact that when they're doing marketing, they're sort of very occupied with the campaign and what it looks like, and whether the media profile is very similar to the target audience, the profile of the target audience, and it's just there's a lot of things you can be really concerned about and get worked up about and have to work hard at. But if it's detached from commercial reality, you can end up in some really weird places, which I think ThinkBox has demonstrated quite nicely about 2 years ago. I mentioned that in a post. I think I summarised that research, and many other people have, where they've just compared what marketers think and what real people think or what real people do, and there's just a huge gap. And so is it grandeur? Is it hubris? All those sorts of things. I don't know. It's just being detached from just reality in that sense. And I don't think you can then, I suppose, really easily get into territories like brand purpose and just thinking that's really important. Because if you start asking consumers what they want, or that you start assuming what they want, or you're basing your let's say your insights between parentheses on engagement, or just talking to very engaged consumers, you can get into all sorts of weird areas where you start thinking that it's very important to ladder up, let's say, what you say in branding or communications, and get talk about very lofty things as saving the world, or sort of happiness and all those sorts of things, and forgetting about the fact that you sometimes just need to tell, we've got a really good toaster. You put your bread in it, and within 2 minutes, you've got the perfect toast. It's a toaster. It's the best toaster you ever buy. It's the best toaster the world has ever seen. That's our toaster. You need to buy it now. Something like that. It's I don't know. It's just and people, maybe marketers think that's sort of dirty, or not dirty is maybe not the right word for it, but it's too simple or simplistic. But it's not. Brands are very little things in people's lives, and just helping them, remind them of the fact that, oh, that thing is a toaster. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I need a toaster. Thank you. I forgot about that. It's it's sometimes amazing, and so that if you listen to the sort of discussions that you end up in, at least in my role, with people at ad agencies or media agencies or research agencies, will probably have the same thing, where just if you're sort of convinced that what Ehrenberg and Sharp and all of their colleagues have written about and researched, and you listen into some of those conversations, or you just read what's been crunched out by Marketing Week or The Drum or anything like that, in many cases, it's really it's amazing.
Yeah, it's alarming, and it drips into brand strategies. So you said recently, perhaps marketing strategy is a bit like pension planning. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, I remember thinking about that because every marketer knows that they need to do something on the long-term stuff. Everybody understands that, sure enough, we need to sell stuff now to people, but we also need to work on, we need to sort of do something so the people that aren't in the market now, but maybe in a year or so, or next quarter, we want to get them in our shop or buy our brand, obviously. So we need to work on the long-term stuff as well. But it's like that pension thing. You know, you need to do something about your pension, at least, especially if you're like me, if you're self-employed, you need to sort of do that. You need to take care of that yourself. And even if you're in a job, obviously, you just need to think about that stuff. But it's sort of the thing you push away and sort of you don't really want to think about it. And then obviously when you turn 50, 55 or 5 years before your pension, around, what is it, you're 60, 65, when you're 65 or anything like that. I should have thought about some of these things about 20 years ago. So sort of that's where it sort of came from, in the sense that, because I don't think, so I think Peter Field and Les Binet, they've obviously done exceptionally good work in analysing the IPA data bank and what they found in there, notwithstanding the challenges that there still are with that data set. But it's, they've already emphasised the importance of the long and short, and it's interesting to see that sort of only now it seems to be picking up. But maybe it's just me noticing it more. But it's I don't think a lot of marketers weren't aware of that fact. But it's sort of, as the pension, they sort of well, yeah, let's not think about that now. But that also really has to do with, just to be honest, and that. It's human nature. It's just trying to look for shortcuts, just being a bit lazy. Not wanting to put in the hard work, and the fact that you're more interested in going from a junior brand manager to a brand manager, or a brand manager to a senior brand manager, etc. Just you're a bit more concerned about how you can get sort of the right results now to further your own career. That will also that's going to be detrimental to making sort of the right decisions for brands in the long term. I think just the extent to which the long game is important if you want to build a brand, if you want to be a successful brand, and if you want to be around in 10 years, that will require different decisions. But that's just so long term, just people. They aren't bothered too much, and that's exactly the same thing as with pensions. So how's your pension going, Giles?
Exactly that. As if you've been talking to my wife. I mean, you raised a couple of really interesting points then, and one latterly was the individual's motive. So as you say, the typical CMO tenure is becoming shorter and shorter. So it does become a what's in it for me if we do dedicate the resource to long term, when actually short term I'm looking for some advancement in my career, and that's clearly a problem that businesses must address, or at least be aware of.
To be honest, it's not just CMOs. I think the CMOs 10 years is hovering around 4 years, but just think about a mid-level brand manager or a marketing manager. So they typically aren't in the same role for 4 years, I would say, especially not the ambitious ones. And so it's sometimes easy to say, well, yeah, it's all these CMOs with their short tenure, and it's because of them. They're obviously, in the end, they're responsible, I would say. But so sure enough, there is we should look at them and ask them the hard questions. But it's I've spoken to several CMOs who simply said to me, well, I'm having a really hard time keeping the good people in my team because they want to move on. And to give you a sort of very specific example on why that is that typically in places like London, Sydney, New York, Amsterdam, places like that, it's housing is expensive. So if you're a mid-level or junior marketing manager, you probably need to commute. You might need to commute an hour and a half to get to your job because the houses are just too expensive. So you're really keen on moving up because you want a better place. You don't want to sit in a two-room studio. You want to be in a better place near the park or whatever. You don't want to commute as long. So there's all sort of very normal, logical pressures on people to actually expedite all of that stuff and just make sure that they get promoted quickly. And unfortunately, the way we sort of promote people is I suppose, very dependent on some of those very short-term results, quick short-term results. And so it's not necessarily just a CMO. He's just being confronted with something he can hardly influence. It's not simply saying, oh, you just need to reward your people differently and that'll be fine, because he can't do something about house prices being as they are, as an example. So um, it's just we're sort of stuck in a mechanism in a world where we just have all of these incentives to produce short-term results. So it's hard, really hard to fight that.
It's a really good observation around house prices. I mean, clearly, I no doubt there's lots of criteria and factors at play, but I hadn't really put it in that context. So
yeah. So surely there's obviously a lot of things, but just a house is sort of obviously an investment that for many people, at least for where I live, it's just one of the biggest investments you make in your life, and people are very keen on living in a nice place, especially when they start having families and all sorts of things. So I agree. There's obviously many other things that need to be factored in, but I think it's a very it's one. This one is sort of probably influences things quite substantially.
So the conditions that the brand managers or everyone on that whole chain of marketers is actually working within is making it harder and harder to make the right decisions, really.
What surprises me in that respect is that, but again, that might be just simply the data set Peter and Les are looking at, is that, if more and more people are picking up on this thing and the importance of the long game, but again, this might just be me in my little bubble. It's sort of surprising to see that what Peter Field finds is that the amount of short-term campaigns actually quadrupled over the last years that they've been looking at it. So so we're really indeed moving in the opposite direction. So maybe the conclusion should be that actually it's not as well understood or acknowledged, or worse, we just can't do anything about it. This is not ending up in a cheerful conversation, I'm afraid.
So if we can be a bit more positive, and I take the full blame for that because I tend to sway things. If we go back to marketing science for a second, are there any particularly interesting and important new advances in marketing science that we can get excited about?
This is actually sort of a thing that it's sort of on my to-do list, because just to put things a bit in context. So what I do a lot in many cases is really sort of revisit and address the basics, so the things that we've known for quite a while, and in my own work, it's a lot of replicating these findings, or and digging into them more deeply. But if I look at sort of new things that are happening in marketing science, it's one of those things where I personally feel that I need to sort of try to be on the lookout a little bit more, I guess. But there are areas I think that are very promising and very interesting. At least what is going on in neuroscience, essentially. I think I'm not yet convinced that what we're seeing and the things that are sort of presented there is already as robust and convincing as some of the people make it sound or make it appear to be. But I think there are some very interesting things being researched by people in that area, and especially people trying to link it to actual buying. So what are we seeing, and to what extent do we see that sort of manifested itself in people's actual buying behavior? Those things are obviously the things that I'm sort of very keen on and interested in, and there are studies now that are being done in that area where people are trying to link those things. The reason why I'm not necessarily convinced about some of these things is that they do seem to be really at odds with things that we've found and consistently found over many years. For example, I do a lot of research into people's associations with brands, so category entry points research, for example, to be very specific about it, but just we measure what people think. and or feel consistently in line with what others like Aaron Ehrenberg or Jenny Romanek have found consistently, is that there is actually very little brand differentiation, at least perceived differentiation. But I think there's an interesting debate where some people are saying, well, yeah, but you're asking people explicitly to say something about brands, what they think, or whether they think something applies to a certain brand when it comes to certain associations. But the critique is, yeah, but you're asking people explicitly, so you'll never get a good answer, and people will think brands are very similar in that respect if you ask them explicitly. However, now that we can measure things implicitly and we can use brain imaging as an example, or implicit testing methods, we actually do see a lot of differentiation between brands. And to be honest, I think that is very interesting, and I'm trying to read up and learn more about it. But I'm not yet convinced that the way it's being researched is sort of has made me change my mind in that respect. But those are actually new developments that I find interesting. I think Koen Pauwels, which is a Belgian professor working in the United States, Northwestern University, if I'm correct, Koen Pauwels. I think he's doing some very interesting research as well in the area I just described. And he is also very much trying to link what people think and say about brands. So not necessarily implicitly, but explicitly, and linking it to actual purchasing behavior. I suppose, and he's finding out some interesting things. But again, I'm personally not yet. That hasn't really changed my mind, because I think there's some issues with the way it's being researched. So I sort of kind of trying to keep track of things, and there's obviously so much stuff being published that I can't ever sort of keep track of that stuff. But sort of the things that interest me haven't yet made me change my mind, which in a way is sort of, I guess, almost boring, because it's sort of, we're finding the same things, and we're just but I'm sort of perfectly at ease with that. So I'm perfectly happy with, again, sort of finding findings that we found for 40 years. But I once had a client who said, well, but this is actually a bit disappointing, because there isn't anything new in there, or things that we didn't know already. So, well, before we started the research, we talked at length about what we will probably find. So, there's always an opportunity to say, well, if that's the case, we'll leave it. But no, they made the decision to press on. But I think they were just hoping just that there will be something in there, sort of to find that little nugget, or that little bit of insight, or that significant difference in something. But if you just show them the result and say, well, actually, this is what we've known for about 40 years, and that's actually that's okay. It means a lot of things, and the implications are X, Y, and Z, and actually that requires a lot of hard work and all yada yada yada. But it's that's not. Yeah, I'm sorry to say, your brand is not very special, or your competitors aren't actually either. So that's sort of always sort of a hurdle you sometimes need to overcome. But to be honest, once you're comfortable with that, actually, your life becomes a lot more easy. To be honest, anyway.
Yeah, and a lot more settled.
Once you sort of feel comfortable with the idea that people don't really care about brands that much, and because of it, they will likely not really think very differently about brands and see them very differently, notwithstanding a few sort of very basic, functional, very obvious things. But that's more about, well, I just like that one better. It looks better, stuff like that. It's more about, so how can we just get that stuff in front of more people? So. A few of them will actually say, "Oh, yeah, I like that one," and it has nothing to do with positioning or just being different. But I know people like Ritson will vehemently disagree with me, and that's fine. Also, to be honest,
that's good though, and I think it's important that people don't always agree. Otherwise, we all just become redundant, and we're not required. In the same way that your JP Hansen, actually, one of his pet hates is the lack of critical thinking in the industry, and the mere fact that you questioned findings of the research recently. You said you weren't necessarily particularly sold on how they sourced and maybe collated their data is so important. And I believe that's the point JP was making, is that so many people just take everything as at face value and accept that it's true without questioning how that conclusion was ever made or how that piece of research was conducted.
I agree. I think if there's one thing that you can learn from how brands grow is, and I sort of emphasize that frequently, is that the findings that you will find in that book are interesting in themselves quite often, because they are in many cases so at odds with the assumptions or the ideas that we have as marketers on what we need to do and work on. But so in that sense, the findings themselves can be really interesting, shocking or whatever as well. But if you just really just think about how brands grow, it's a book that helps you, that sort of helps you and guides you in how do I sort of make sense of things, how do I prove things, how do I make sure that if I try to make sense of the world around me and try to collect information that will help me do a better job at marketing. It's more, that book is more special in the sense that it really just helps you how to go about that and how you can collect evidence and be evidence based in your way and in what you do. And in that sense, that's not new. That's just science. But that is I would say the real sort of big contribution of that book, I suppose, to the marketing community of late. In that sense, it's just how do I prove things? I think one of the things I mentioned that in Intergreens at the ending. I think one of the most important things I think I've learned from my getting to know Byron Sharp and corresponding with him and having conversations with him about things is simply, he taught me the question to ask myself the question: can I really tell that from the data? And that's really a very good question to ask yourself, because in interpreting the world around us, and we obviously read and see things, and people present us with evidence or findings, and asking yourself, can I really tell that from the data? Because typically consultants will pitch quite rather wild things to you. So, for example, just sorry, I'm elaborating a little bit, but just even yesterday, it was this guy saying that influencer marketing had managed, a scientific peer-reviewed paper had demonstrated that nano influencers could realize a 30% uplift in sales.
Wow!
So it's really like, so you want me now to go over to Heineken or General Mills or GM and say, well, guys, I think I've got this little thing for you where you can get a 30% uplift in sales. Simply, that can only come from a tiny number for it to be such a huge uplift. And indeed, it was just, they managed to do so in an in-flight situation, so like so sales in a single plane. So nano influencer had managed to have to instead of sell 2 bottles of whiskey, they sold what is it 3, something like that. And it's sort of like, wow, yeah. So now try that at scale. Anyway, so it's and then if you just really ask yourself, well, can you really tell that from data? Really, does it really work like that? And you probably, it's like that little thread on a sweater, you just need to start pulling it on it, and in many cases with the stuff that's pitched to us, you just need to pull through threads, and then you've got an emperor without any clothes, right?
Yeah. So easy to leave out the context of something that's demonstrated a 30% uplift or whatever it is. So one of my favorite examples is 99% of serial killers are breastfed. Therefore, if you breastfeed a baby, they'll become a serial killer. Yeah. And that's just too insane. It's a good example.
Yeah.
So talking about eat your greens. So how do you even begin to oversee putting together a book that contains so many industry legends?
Yeah. Well, it all started completely different, to be honest. I was writing regularly, at least in Dutch, writing blogs, and that was sort of 8-9 years ago, I suppose. And obviously, I realized that there were more idiots like me trying to, make sense of the world and try to sort of bring some sense into the industry by writing about research or things like that. So I quickly found out and followed all these people, corresponded with them in many cases. So someone who I was corresponding with quite frequently was Ian Pritchard. I think it was on your show as well.
Yes.
Is that right? Yep.
Correct. Yeah.
So I guess and he was. I really liked his, and I still like his stuff. I think at one point we were saying, well, shouldn't we just try and see if we can do something together and see this sort of bring that out? Yeah. And so that kept dragging on, and nothing really happened. So I at one point really got sort of fed up because I felt like there was sort of room for a book where it wasn't just the big famous academic Byron Sharp or any other guru, very often with an academic background, that was telling us what we needed to do in marketing. But there were actually just very large numbers of just practitioners, just people are working at research agencies, ad agencies, or consultants like I am, or all sorts of people with all various backgrounds and sort of working in various sub industries, so to speak, that picking up on this stuff, writing about it, speaking about it, etc. So I thought, well, I still think readers would appreciate that, sort of also as a signal to the market that it's there are so many people out there already that we can learn from and have very interesting ways of sharing the knowledge. So I said, well, I think I just need to just start asking people whether they'd be interested in contributing to a book where we try to sort of fight all of the nonsense that's out there and try to bring some sense into the industry. And I must say there were very few people that didn't want to contribute, simply because some of them just didn't have the time or couldn't deliver their piece in time. And I think it's just very lucky that I think I sort of struck a chord, and all of these fantastic people have contributed to what is now Eat Your Greens. It used to be A View from the Trenches. That's something Eon sort of thought up. But we thought the sort of warlike analogy was maybe a bit too cliche, and I think it was actually Bob Hoffman at one point who was asking him about it. And they said, well, he thought it wasn't specific enough. I'm not saying Eat Your Greens is more specific in that sense, but at least it's a bit of a quirky thing to say in marketing, but it's indeed that sort of thing your mum obviously always told you. That you needed to eat your veggies, so it's indeed the thing. It's a good thing, just have some of that as well, and have your fries, but have this as well, and that will be fine. So I think that sort of idea and sentiment sort of made sense. And I'm still happy with it, to be honest. I think it works, and but first and foremost, I'm very grateful and happy that so many brilliant people took the time in their undoubtedly busy lives to sit down and write something. And I'm already thinking about a new edition, to be honest. So hopefully there's more to come. I actually think we won't give it the same name, though. I think sequels have a tendency to not be as successful as the first movie.
True.
So it might be something different. Anyway, any suggestions are open in that sense, and you obviously hope that people will like it. There were several ideas in the book why we set it up like it was set up, in terms of the length of the articles and all of those things. And it's just, you can only hope that people appreciate that idea. But it seems that people indeed do appreciate a book from various people with articles that aren't too long, so you can sort of really pick it up. You don't really need to start at the beginning or whatever. So yeah, it's very rewarding to see that sort of that idea resonates and people are happy with it. So that's been it's a lot of fun.
Asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking our listeners for questions. There's a couple I'd like to put to you, please, starting with Samantha. And this is relevant given we're discussing Eat Your Greens. And she asks, if you were able to force everyone working in marketing to read one chapter from Eat Your Greens, which would it be and why?
So there is a reason why the first chapter is the first chapter.
Okay.
And the first chapter actually only became the first chapter after all the other chapters were in. And the reason why I'm a bit reluctant to say, well, I would probably ask people or encourage people to read the first chapter is just because, Charles Graham and myself wrote it. But I would still encourage people probably to start there, because if you read all the other chapters, but you've already read the first one, a lot of the things that people will mention there and be critical of will make sense in the light of what we talked about earlier, the banana, so the distribution, and what that means for marketing. It will tell you, it will help you understand why short-termism, what the problem is with short-termism, what the problem is with online media or low-reach media, and many other things that are being addressed in the book. Not everything, but many things. And it's really after I read all the chapters from all the contributors that one of the risks I took was, oh crap, they might all write about the same thing. But nobody had really written a piece about the negative binomial distribution and double jeopardy and duplication of purchases. But for a book that is about fact-based thinking and unquestionably needed to be in there. So I think if people read that first chapter, a lot of the other chapters will make sense, and actually a lot of other things in marketing just generally will make a lot of sense, I hope. But it's mainly because of the fantastic work, and it's really almost unique work that Charles Graham did that we describe in the chapter as well, about the long-term loyalty studies that he conducted. It's just I think marketers will learn some very fundamental basic things. But if I'm, and otherwise, I think I probably nominate Gareth Price's chapter as a very good starting point as well. I think that as well is a very, very good sort of introductory piece, or a piece that will could be a very good place to start with.
Okay, thank you. And clearly, everyone should read every chapter, really.
Well,
so let's Samantha's suggestion. We only read one. The second question is from Dave, and he asks, how did millennials end up getting so much overblown importance? Was it down to lazy, shite research?
Well, I think it was just because the previous generation just became too old. So we just needed to come up with, we needed to keep focusing on the young, new, hip people, obviously. So obviously we just needed to come up with something new, and we came up with millennials. It's something obviously that we make a lot of fun of, I guess, and other people take it very seriously, but. I've never actually really sort of looked into when that term sort of first popped up, but it's just so wrong in so many ways, and it's, even if you think about it in sort of practical terms for marketing, it's so unuseful as a concept also. So it's just disregards all the sort of differences that might might be there between the people within that age bracket, and we just treat them as one big group and they're all the same. It's just sort of disregards or any form of heterogeneity that there unmistakably is. But anyway, it's just in so many ways it's so not useful. Yeah. But shite research. All about, to be honest, I think no research at all. I think the few people that have actually looked into it found that millennials are very much like other people, so other generations. Yeah. So it's probably just a lack of real proper research into that age group.
Right, yeah, actually that's exactly right. It's shite research and no research. And I think no research, you could argue, is shite research. So the final part of the interview, Wiemer, is we put our 4 pertinent poses to our guests. Number 1, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I'm just trying to find the right way of saying it in a way that makes sense. I would have encouraged my younger self to learn more about statistics and numbers, and not sort of as your pension, try to push that away as something. Yeah, I know I need to get better at that, but just I'll leave it for now. It depends on what age my younger self is. if he was really young, I'd say, well, you probably, there's a lot of value in picking up physics, or sticking with physics and things like that. If it was a bit older, I would have probably encouraged myself to do and study, be more trained in more quantitatively. Would you say quantitatively trained, or trained as a quant? So to be more, better trained as statistics, things like that, interpreting numbers and research, because often very feel that, my life would have been so much easier if I was just, more apt at that, more at ease with it. It still feels like a lot of hard work, and I think I could have saved myself a lot more hard work that way. So I don't know. I don't know how you say that to yourself, in the sense, learn more about numbers, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't drop physics, god damn it. Something like that.
There's a thread there. There's a constant. If you could banish one thing from the industry, then what would that be, and why?
Yeah, I was actually planning on saying Simon Sinek. But Simon Sinek is one of those sort of people, and it's oh my god, Giles, I really can't give you a really nice, crisp, snappy answer. That's it. There's so many things wrong with it. I'm trying to sort of think of the thing that sort of the thing.
Okay. Any books that you would recommend?
Oh yeah. I've got a sort of list of things, but I'm afraid many of them might actually be all sort of the usual suspects. But
if you say them enough, hopefully people will end up reading them.
Yeah, that's true. So, but I'm not going to say How Brands Grow 1 or 2. So those are excellent books, or any of the stuff by Desmond and Peter Field. But because I think those have been mentioned before. So I did a list. I made a list. It's a list of books that have really helped me in my thinking. So it's not necessarily about marketing always, but sort of books that have really helped me in my thinking. So one book I particularly liked was one by Nick Chater, The Mind is Flat. I think that is a very provocative book, very interesting read. I love Goldacre's book called Bad Science. There's another one called I think you'll find it's a little bit more complicated than that, which is also very good. There are two books about statistics, and as I said, I'm constantly trying to train myself to get better at that. And it's sort of the famous How to Lie with Statistics one. Don't know the author, but there's another one called Naked Statistics. I really like that. There's one book that I really like, which is by Thomas Sowell, who's an economic, called Economic Facts and Fallacies. I really like that, because it's really it's really, there's sort of fundamental thinking in that book that's really helping, helping my thinking in general. And then two books that I really like about just being a little bit more optimistic about the world are Factfulness and Progress. Factfulness by Rosling and Progress by Norberg. The last two books that I want to mention, sorry, it's a long list, is The Consuming Instinct by Gard Saad. I don't know if someone has ever mentioned that book, but that book was very interesting in terms of also, again, from a more behavioral psychology perspective, evolutionary psychology perspective. It's really understanding that there are some very simple, basic things that drive people, and you can still see that around you everywhere. And so we try to do all sorts of crazy, weird stuff, but if you keep in the back of your mind what really drives us as humans, some of these things will fall on barren ground. And maybe the one that has had a very profound effect on me is a book by I always get his last name wrong, Zissner, I think, but the book is called On Writing Well. It's just a book about how you write well, and to be honest, that's another thing in our profession, and especially if you're a sort of strategy, planning, consulting job, or even just as a researcher. It's just, words are very important, and the words that we use and the way we communicate and how we communicate. It's so important to think about how you express yourself, and you should always be rigorous about trying to express yourself as simply as possible, and that you need to continuously keep working on that.
Yeah.
And revisiting your words. And for me, English is not my mother tongue, but I always, with my English colleagues, we're constantly having conversations about that as well. About, is this am I saying it right? Can I say it more simply? I think that is so important in all the things that we do, especially when it's around rather difficult concepts like marketing signs and things like that. And that's why I thought up the banana. It's not so much to be funny about it, but it's trying to find simple analogies, simple ways of explaining people things in a sort of a simple, engaging way. Because that's probably just a way how we can make it work and make it stick. So that's my hope based on sort of the thing I try to do. Not necessarily come up with new exciting things, but really try to find ways to cover the basics, discuss the basics in simple and engaging ways.
Yeah, you're preaching to the converted there, 100%. We talk about trimming the fat when it comes to copywriting and messaging and just making things simpler. If it's simpler, it will be understood quicker. If it's understood quicker, the comms will be more effective. And as I'm sure I've referenced this on a previous show, but Dave Trott frequently says that stupid people mistake complicated for clever.
Yes.
But it takes real intelligence to get back to simple.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's hard to explain things simply.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same with with sort of the distribution where people say, well, it can't be that simple, can it? Well, yeah, but it's really, really, really hard work to get that right. But it sometimes is as simple as that. But if you read the book on writing well, what's so very interesting, I just read his 30th edition, and in it he just describes how even for this 30th edition, he just shows a picture of all the little things that he amended in it, and just taking away a few words here and there, and you're like, oh my god, this is a guy, this is his job, and even after 30 editions, he's still tweaking around. And this is what I liked about Ehrenberg as well. For me, he's the true hero of marketing. Is really one of the truly great men in marketing. Is that even if you read his texts and his quotes, I had a really hard time finding the original source for one of his quotes, because he was apparently continuously tinkering with his words and adjusting them and tinkering with them and thinking them through again and again. And it's I've never had the pleasure of meeting him, but I think I've read a lot of the things he wrote, and I think he's as I say, I think he's one of the real true grand men of marketing. Yeah, it's so impressive. Anyway.
Number 4 then, so the last of our posers, is we always dedicate every show to somebody, and we like our guest to do that for us. So would you dedicate this show to somebody, please?
Yeah, I'll dedicate it to 2 people then, sorry. Andrew Ehrenberg, but also the man that worked with him for a very long time, and he was an associate at our firm for a while, but someone who from whom I learned a lot. That would be John Scriven, and he worked at the Ehrenberg Bass Institute for a long time as well. But he was someone taught me a great deal, and I'm very grateful for that. But unfortunately, he passed away recently. But yeah, so it's to both of those people that I would dedicate it. Yeah, definitely.
Well said, thank you. So as a final call to action, everyone can head over to the podcast homepage, calltoaction.co. We'll share links to everything we've discussed in the last hour, including the recommended books, plus crucially a link to Eat Your Greens, which I couldn't recommend more highly. How else can people get more Wiemer Snijders?
So I'm actually quite easy to find, and really, if people want to reach out to me, I'm always open to questions and getting to know new people, so they can actually really find me on LinkedIn or Twitter quite easily. It's fairly easy to find an email address there. Otherwise, you'll find it on our company's website, and really people can reach out by email. I might not always have time to answer things, but people shouldn't hesitate to reach out if they want to. Well, you said it yourself. I think they can get a bit more of me in Eat Your Greens. I'm trying to again write more, so hopefully that people will be able to read more from me in the future. a little bit more frequently. And there will be a new second edition of Eat Your Green, so they'll definitely be able to find me in there. Other than that, I'm actually traveling quite a bit all over the place. I'm in India in about 2 weeks, and in Germany a few weeks after. So I'll continuously try to be sort of physically available all over the shop if people want to have me. So people can attend conferences where I am at that point, and more than happy to chat with people further if they're there.
Amazing. Well, that's great to hear. So expect a plethora of messages then on LinkedIn coming your way. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure and an honour to talk to you.
Thank you. It was the pleasure was all mine. Thank you, Giles. This was very very nice.
And thank you to everyone who continues to listen and support the show. Please continue to get in touch with questions to put to our guests, share feedback, and anything else you want to send our way. Simply email us at hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try and I try and I try and I try. I can't get no call to action. Oh, I can't get no call to action. Yeah.